Before discussing what is an object in JavaScript, let's consider two objects from our real world that we use on a daily basis. First of all, we have a car. We describe it to someone else with these details or attributes: manufacturer or make, model, color, etc. But most often we are more interested in talking about the features it offers. So these are the basic actions or behaviors of a car. First of all, we start the engine. We could change gear, accelerate, brake, and stop. So this is how we describe a real world object. Now we have the second object, computer or laptop, that we use on a daily basis for programming. And here we have the list of attributes or behaviors of it. Brand, model, display are some of the attributes that we often use for describing a computer or laptop. Now under behaviors, we start with turning on the device, and then there are endless of things that we could do with a computer. Some of them are coding or programming, browsing through internet, drawing, etc. and etc. Once we are done, we could shut down the device. So here we have described two real-world objects, car and laptop, with this list of properties and behaviors. Now, when it comes to JavaScript Object, it allows us to represent data like real-world entities and treat them as such. I mean, it's not possible to create a car or a computer through programs and make them do what they actually do in real world. Instead, we are copying the concepts of real-world entities into programming language. You will get the full picture gradually as we go further. So when it comes to JavaScript Object also, we use this list of properties and behaviors. But when it comes to programming, we use different terminologies. Instead of attributes, we call them as properties. And instead of behaviors, we call them as methods. So we'll be describing an object with a list of properties and methods. But these properties and methods are just indicating what the object is consisting of. But the whole idea of mimicking real-world objects into programming is not just to describe them with properties or methods like this. It can only be described in terms of object-oriented programming concept, in short, OOP or OOP. We will discuss them later in this course. For now, let's look how to create and work with JavaScript Object, and later we will discuss these concepts of OOP. There are different ways of creating JavaScript object, but here we're gonna discuss the object literal syntax. Without further ado, let's get started with creating object through object literal syntax. So here we have the object student, and this is how we define an object literal. Everything will be enclosed within a pair of curly braces like this. Inside them, we can provide the list of properties and methods. So first of all, we have this property student ID, which is the unique ID provided for the student. Let it be something like this. And after that, we have first name and last name. And finally, department. Currently inside this object, we have a bunch of properties describing this object student. So here we have a single property. Inside them, this is student ID, which is called as key, and then we have a colon followed by this value for this key here. So a property is defined with a key value pair, and here we have a list of key value pair and which describe this object student here. While creating this object, we have to separate these key value pairs with a comma like this. As I said, currently inside this object we only have properties. We will add methods into this object later. Now let's print this object student. See, this is how an object is printed to developer console. So here we have the list of properties with their value in ascending order. Now just ignore this prototype object here. It will be there for all the objects in JavaScript. We are going to discuss them under OOP session later. Now let's look how to access properties within this object here. There are two ways to access properties from an object. They are dot notation or dot syntax and bracket notation. So here we have the object. It has these properties. In order to access this first name, we could do this in dot notation. First of all, we have the object name, which is student, and then we have a dot symbol or period symbol followed by the property name, which is first name. In order to access the same property first name in bracket notation, we could do this. First of all, we have the object name, and then within a pair of square brackets like this, we could provide the property name. And don't forget to enclose them within quotes like this. So let's do the same here. Console.log, then student dot first name. See, it prints the value of this property first name here, which is Kathleen. We could do the same with square bracket notation also. We just need to enclose the property within a square brackets, and let's wrap the same within quotes like this. See, it also works. Even though both of these notations are using for same purpose, dot notation is often preferred over square bracket notation because it is straightforward and easy to write. But there are some limitations to using this dot notation here. If you look at these property names here, all of them are valid identifier, like we name a variable or a function. We have already discussed these rules for naming identifiers. So it should only contain Unicode letters, numbers from 0 to 9, and there is only two symbols allowed in an identifier. They are $symbol and underscore. The identifier can't begin with a number, and finally it can't be a JavaScript keyword as it is. So if these properties names are a valid identifier, we could use dot notation. And this square bracket notation can be used anywhere. There is no limitation for square bracket notation, but in case of dot notation here, if the property name is not a valid identifier, then we can't use this dot notation here. To demonstrate you the same, create a new property here, age, and let's assign that with 21. This is a valid identifier. Instead of this, I will just use this pound symbol or hash symbol just before the age. Currently you could see this error, unexpected identifier. Actually, it is possible to create properties with a non-identifier name. In order to make it possible, we just need to enclose the property name within quotes like this. So it is possible to create properties with a non-identifier name like this. We just need to enclose them within quotes like this. Now, in order to access this property here, we can't use this dot notation. Let me duplicate this line, student.hashAge. See, here we have an error. In these situations, we can use square bracket notation like this. See, it is working. Here we have the value of this property hashAge. Now let me show you another example. Let's create another property, blood group, and let it be B positive. Now if you remember those rules for naming a valid identifier, it is allowed to have underscore in the name. So this is a valid identifier, so we could access it with dot notation itself, like blood group. So here we have the output B positive. Normally we name these properties like this here, first name or last name. So it should be something like this, blood group. But here I'm just trying to show you the limitations of dot notation. It is also possible to leave a space in between blood and group. Since we have a space here, it is not a valid identifier, so we have to enclose this within quotes like this. While accessing the same, we have to use the square bracket notation and also enclose them within quotes like this. Instead of this white space, if we use hyphen like this, it is still an invalid identifier name, so we have to use the square bracket notation like this. So that's the first exception for dot notation. Now there is one more limitation for using dot notation. For example, inside this student object, I just want to save the mark scored in second language. For that, first of all, I will create a variable outside this object like this, let second language. It would be different for different students, so that's why I save the second language in a variable like this. So let it be English. Now instead of saving the mark earned in this English exam like this, we could use this variable second language. For that, we just need to do this, just enclose the variable within a square brackets like this. Now let me print this object here, student. Here we have the object printed. See, here we have the property English with the value 98. So while creating properties with a variable like this, we could change the property name through this property when necessary. For example, if the student's second language is Spanish, we just need to update this language here, and the created object will be having the property Spanish like this. See? So this is a dynamic way of creating properties through variables like this. Now back to our limitations for using this dot notation here. In order to access this property here, we can't use dot notation. Let me duplicate this line here. Let's provide second language. Let me get rid of these lines here. So here we have the output undefined from this dot notation here. So it is saying there is no property with this given name second language. So this notation assumes the second language is a property like first name or last name. But it is not a property. The created property name is different, which is there inside this variable second language. In this case, it is Spanish. So in order to access the same, we have to use square bracket notation. Second language like this. See, here we have the output 98. So when we use square bracket notation with variables like this, the actual value is replaced in place of the variable. So that's all about the limitations of dot notation. Now I just want to clear one more thing. In order to use this square bracket notation with a variable, it's not necessary to create the actual property with a variable like this. We can access other properties also if the properties were saved in a variable. For example, let me create a variable x. Inside that, if I save last name, you could access this property last name with this x variable. Instead of this variable second language, just replace that with x here. So here we have the value of the property last name. Now I hope you understood the limitations of dot notation. In all other cases, it is very common to use dot notation. As I said, it is straightforward and very easy to write. So let me get rid of this log statement here. Now, while defining the properties of an object, if we repeat a property name, the previous property will be overwritten. For example, we already have this property student ID here. If I repeat the same property here like this with a different value, the previous value will be overwritten. To see the same, let me print this object here. See, here we have the property student ID with the last value that we have provided here. So the property name should be unique, otherwise it will override the previous occurrence. Now let's talk about type of an object literal. So here we have created an object with object literal syntax. Now let's check the type of this object. For that, we could use this operator, type of operator. So here we have the output object. So type of an object is object itself. To be specific, object created through object literal is also an object. So type of any object created through object literal is again an object. See, here we have an empty object without any properties. So it also comes under the data type object. Now inside the object we have a property ID with 0. So if there is no property inside the object, then we call them as empty object. So far inside the object we only created properties. Now let's add methods into the object. Like properties for methods also, we will start with a key like this, something greet, hi, and here we have to provide the method. A method in an object is just a function. So the only difference is that when function is defined within an object, we call them as methods. So that's the only difference between function and method. So in order to create the method here, we'll be using the same syntax as that of the function. So here we have the function expression to be specific, and inside the function we just need to print this message hi. So inside this object we have our first method, which is greet hi. Now in order to call this method, we just need to do this. First of all, we have the object name, then we can access them like properties. Using dot notation we could do this greet hi and then a pair of parentheses like this. So here we have the output from the method hi. We could also use square bracket notation for methods also. It is working as expected, but we don't use square bracket notation for methods in a function. In other words, we always name the methods with valid identifiers so that we can use them or access them with dot notation like this. So here we have created a simple method which is just printing this hi message to the developer console. Now instead of this sample method, let's create a method which is relevant to this object student here. So I will name the object as get full name. Now with this function, we just need to return the full name of the student. Inside this object, we already have first name and last name of the student. Now we just need to append them like this, first name plus last name. Now let's invoke the function here, student dot get full name. See, here we have the error, first name is not defined. With this statement here, we are expecting the concat operation of these properties, first name and last name. But JavaScript is looking for variables first name and last name defined outside this object. So with this syntax, we can't access properties within this object here. So here's the first way, which is just using the object name like this, student.firstname plus student.last name. So currently we don't have the error. To see the output, we just need to print the returned value from the function. So I will just call the function inside this log statement here. Let's move this function call to this log statement here. See, here we have the output. So both of the first name and last name are concatenated. We just need a space in between them. So I will just concat the white space here. So here we have the full name Kathleen Jonas. So this is working perfectly, but this way of referring properties within an object is not at all recommended because the name of the object is hard-coded here. Instead, we use this keyword, this dot first name and this dot last name. Now, in order to access properties of an object within its methods, we have to use this keyword like this dot first name and this dot last name. Now look at this function definition here. We have created this method or function using function expression. Instead of this, you could also use arrow functions like this. But this keyword is not working as we expected. It returns undefined. So this keyword won't work within methods of an object when the function is defined with arrow function syntax. While comparing different ways of creating functions, we skip the discussion related to this topic, this keyword behavior. So this keyword behaves differently in both function expression and arrow function. But I'm not going to complete this comparison here. We need few more prerequisite topics to be discussed before getting into the nitty-gritty things of this keyword. I will do a separate session on this keyword in future sessions. For now, just understand this. In order to access properties in a method, we can use this keyword with function expression. It won't work if the method is defined through arrow syntax. More about this keyword will be discussed later. So we always use function expression syntax to add method into an object. To shorten this syntax here, instead of using key value pairs like we do with properties, we could just provide the function like this. So it is similar to defining functions like this with function expression. To shorten this syntax, we just need to do this. Like we have simplified this method syntax without a key value pair, it is also possible to create properties without key value pairs. Suppose we already have a variable with the name student ID. Inside that we have saved this student ID. Let me get rid of this duplicate property name here. So we already saved the student ID here. Now we could use the same variable while adding the property here. Let's provide the variable here, student ID. If you want to verify that, let's print the object student like this. So here we have the property student ID with the value from this variable here. Now, since this property name and this variable name is same, we could avoid this key value pair. We just need to provide student ID. So when we provide a property like this, then the JavaScript engine assumes to have this key value pair, so we could shorten the syntax like this. You could see the same property here, student ID, with the value from this variable here. Here we already created an object student. Now let's look how to add or modify or delete a property from this object. To add a property into this object, for that you could either use dot notation or square bracket notation. So into this object student, I'm going to add a new property age, and let's assign the value here something 24. So here we have added a new property age into this object. You could see the same here. It is also possible with square bracket notation also. Let's add the blood group here, B positive. So this is how we can add properties into an existing JavaScript object. In order to update or modify an existing property, we could do the same. We are using the same syntax like this here. So student dot, let's change student ID. So we could do this. Student ID is equal to something 1, 2, 3. See here we have modified the value of the property student ID to 1, 2, 3. So when we assign a value to an object property like this, if this property is not there inside the object, then that property will be added to the object like we have done here. Before this line of program, inside this object, we don't have a property with the name age. So a new property with the name age is created and this value is assigned to it. If that property is already there inside the object, then the value of the property will be updated to the new value provided. So that's how we can add or modify properties in an object. Now we have the final operation, which is delete. In order to delete a property from this object student, we just need to use this operator delete. And then after that, just mention that property. So student dot, suppose we just need to remove this property department. So we could do this department. Now let's check whether the property is deleted or not. See, there is no property with the name department. So that's how we delete an existing property from an object. Now finally, as a bonus discussion, I want to show you how to nest objects within arrays or arrays within object. Currently inside this program, we only have a single object, student. But in a practical project, we have to work with a collection of students. In that case, we will be nesting objects within arrays. So we'll be creating an array like this, students. It is an array. Inside that we can have multiple objects like this here. For example, student ID. To demonstrate the topic, I will only create two properties inside this object, student ID and full name. So here we have the first object corresponding to the first student. Like this, we can have any number of objects within this array. So here we have the second student. Like this, we could create a collection of students using arrays and objects together. If you want to access the first student, you could do this students, which is the name of the array. In order to access the first object, we could use the index 0. So here we have the first object from the array. If you want to access the first student full name, you could do this. So that's how we deal with collection of objects. Now the reverse is also possible. For example, if you want to save hobbies of the student, you could create a property like this, hobbies, and then we can assign an array like this here. Let me provide few common hobbies here: reading, travel, pets, etc. We could access the array like we access properties. So student dot hobbies. It will return the array that we have provided. Now it is very common to have arrays as a property for the object or creating arrays with objects as a collection like this. So that's all about fundamentals of objects created through object literal syntax. In next session, we'll be discussing destructuring syntax in JavaScript with spread and rest operators. Again, if you found this video helpful, please be subscribed to this channel, CodAffection. If you haven't yet, please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can also benefit from this. See you in next session.